everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Big Just Energy podcast. My name is Shakaila Forbes-Bell. I'm the founder of Psychology.com. I'm a fashion psychologist and author of Big Just Energy. I'm really excited about this episode. I have two fantastic people on with me who I really admire and who are doing big things in the fashion space. Today I have Eshita Kabra and I also have Tamara Cincik, and I'm going to let these lovely ladies introduce themselves because I think it's best when you're just giving up yourself and you can say exactly what you got going on. So let's start with you, Tamara. Tell us a bit about yourself and what do you do?
Thank you. Yeah, I can hear someone banging in the background. Who is that?
Oh.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, I mean that's life, right? So my name's Tamara. I've worked in the fashion industry for most of my adult life. I worked as a fashion editor for a number of publications. I've always had an interest in politics and policy. I was a campaigner really from being very young, and I was offered the opportunity to apply for a mentoring scheme, which led to me ending up working in Parliament. And it was while I was there, I realised there was a massive gap between this world that I saw as the centre of the universe, i.e. the fashion industry, and politicians who also thought they were the centre of the universe. And from that, I decided to launch something called Fashion Roundtable, which is a think tank which addresses systemic and structural issues within the sector, of which there are many, especially with the climate crisis and the issues such as are always in the news, whether it's the flood in Pakistan and the impacts of the climate emergency on supply chains, or our participation in that possibly unknowingly through our purchase practice.
Fantastic. And I think you're doing such important work that we're going to get into in just a bit. But before we do, Eshita, would you like to introduce yourself for us?
Sure. My name is Eshita Kabra. I'm the founder and CEO of ByRotation. ByRotation is a social fashion rental app. So essentially, it's like the Instagram of fashion rentals. So you can lend things, you can rent things, thereby sharing what you already have with each other. So you can save the planet, save money, make money at the same time. Lots of reasons to do it.
I love that. And I'm such a fan. I've definitely used ByRotation before. And as I mentioned, we'll get into it shortly. But before we start, I'm going to ask a question that I ask everybody who's joined the podcast. What does having Big Just Energy mean to you? Eshita, I'll start with you first.
Big dress energy. I think it's just being really comfortable and feeling very confident in whatever you're wearing. You know, that doesn't need to be a very loud outfit. It just needs to make you feel very good in your own skin.
Fantastic. And Tamara?
Just unmuting myself there. I think it's when you're ready for the catwalk of life. So when you go out into the world and you feel like I can own this day, like whichever personality or part of your personality you might choose to be that day, it's you're owning your space.
The catwalk of life. I love that. I might have to get that printed on a t-shirt. So let's go and dive on in. So Tamara, so you've uniquely combined fashion with something a lot of people wouldn't think makes sense. Again, like for me, it's fashion psychology, but for you, it's fashion and Parliament. Can you just tell us what really drove you into this career? Because it's not really a space that we find overlapping quite a lot. So tell us a bit more about your journey into starting Fashion Roundtable and fashion and politics in general.
I mean, we're apolitical as an organisation. It's not that we are a part of any one political party, but ultimately every decision that you're making in your life will have it will have been determined by government legislation in the country that you live in. So, for instance, in the news at the moment is the situation in Iran, where women are protesting at the decision that the government has there of having this kind of like head veil police. So if you look back to before 1979 in the revolution, there wasn't such a law. That came in after the Shah fell, and then the communist government fell, and then there was the Shah came back. The Ayatollah Khomeini came. and actually what you have is a very young, social media adept population in a country who might not want to have to wear a veil, and obviously there's been the murder of a woman who was of Kurdish ethnicity in Iran, and this has led to mass protests both in Iran and all across the world of people saying enough is enough. Now, where Fashion Roundtable holds a slightly nuanced space is that we would never discuss a situation without also offering up the alternative view and just holding that space. It can be sometimes very uncomfortable, which is what being apolitical is. So, you know, the tenet that we would take on this and would share is that it is up to the woman to decide what she wants to wear. If she wants to wear a veil in France, where it has been banned in public spaces, this is also her decision. If she doesn't want to wear it in Iran, that is also her decision. So ultimately, every single decision, and I often use the most facile one so it makes people aware of it, the ingredients of your toothpaste are determined by legislation. So every single thing you do, even however much you think you live in a democracy or with agency, you are still bound by rules and regulations, and ultimately that's legislation. And parliamentarians are who pass that legislation. So unless we have conduits into Parliament and to government, they will make decisions based on a lack of insight into a sector. So for the largest of the creative industries, which is the fashion industry, to not really have a conduit into government, I would say is a flaw. And what you'll see in UK politics at the moment, there's obviously some real turbulence at the moment with the economy. And the support that is being given is primarily to the financial sector. The financial sector doesn't make lots more than the creative industries as a whole. It's just their voice has been louder, and parliamentarians possibly have worked there, so they understand it better. So I would say that by not having a voice, we're losing opportunities.
Yeah, fantastic. I completely agree. And I've spoken about this as well in the book, and how different forms of fashion can be used in a political sense as well. We've had the Hands Off My Hijab protest, the Million Hoodie March protest in the States. I know a woman, I can't remember her last name, Nicola. I think she lobbied to have high heels not be a mandatory thing for women to wear in the workplace. Can you give us maybe some examples of, I know you say that the work with Fashion Roundtable is apolitical, but can you give us some examples of how you've seen like politics really kind of impact fashion in this sense, and what you're doing essentially to make sure that you have this kind of trickle down where you're seeing like real change happening on the ground?
So I don't think it's easy, and I think that there are particular challenges at the moment. Yeah, I mean, but the Chancellor did declare that the VAT retail export scheme would be returned to the UK. So basically, when we left the EU, the Chancellor decided to get rid of what's called the VAT res scheme. So if you were a luxury consumer of goods and you were traveling, and you could get your VAT back. So ultimately, the decision to stop that was so obviously ridiculous, and it centered Paris as the destination of choice for the luxury consumer. And not only that, people from here were going there to get, especially if they had two passports, and they would go there and then claim the VAT back. So it just wasn't in line with how luxury global consumers shop. And also the impacts that COVID have had on hospitality and tourism was such that it combined with other issues. The argument that we used wasn't just about Bicester and Mayfair. It was about a whole range of other people. Airport were up in arms about it. You know, it would impact, say, someone that, I don't know, is going to Liverpool to see the Beatles' birthplace, and then wanted to buy some products in the town centre there. So I saw it much more as a nationwide issue, but it was very much played as though, oh, why is Mayfair up in arms about it? But for the luxury market, they saw that as a worse impact than Brexit. So I welcome the decision to bring it back. But there are other issues that I think where they need to also throw their attention. I mean, at the moment, we have a government of tax breaks. So obviously they're doing everything they can, and there are some worrying signs about the balance of that idea of the economy.
Great. Tamara, sorry, before we continue, I think your mic is just hitting against your clothes or something on your, if you just want to pull it a bit forward.
What,
Oh.
like a moustache?
Yeah, if you could
I'm
have it.
I'm actually wearing a mic because I do podcasts, and if people don't wear mics, it echoes. So
Okay, perfect. I can hear you perfectly now. That's great.
okay, I'll hold it like this.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I guess you're talking about, the way, I guess, like legislation and fashion kind of intersect and the business behind it as well. I think a lot of the times we forget that fashion is such a huge employer of different people. It just affects the economy in such a drastic way. And then again, talking about business and creating something from the ground up, Eshita, I'd love to talk to you about ByRotation and really what drove you to start to create it.
I came up with the idea for ByRotation from a very sort of, I guess, first world problem, just this need for wanting to wear different clothes for my holiday. So I was going on my honeymoon to Rajasthan, where I was born in India. And this was, more than 13, 14 years of being away from my hometown. And I wanted to show it to my husband, who's not Indian and, had never been there.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was planning this trip of a lifetime, I, turned to social media for, I guess, inspiration on where to visit, where to stay, the museums and the palaces to visit, and then also the outfits to wear. And I couldn't help but notice a lot of women were never repeating clothes that they had, posted on the gram, so as to say, that very well-known hashtag OOTD outfit of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't help but wonder, where do all these clothes go? And can I just pay this woman to borrow her clothes? But maybe that's weird because there's no such thing like it. So I started thinking about fashion rental and how the UK in particular didn't really have any digitized sort of offering. You could go to the high street and maybe rent like a tuxedo or something like that for men. Or you could rent like a ball gown for some, fancy event that you were going to. But nothing more casual and sort of for quality and designer fashion. So it wasn't actually until my honeymoon that I saw a lot of textile waste in my suburban hometown. So that's 2 hours away from Jaipur. And I couldn't help but feel I was part of the problem. I too had bought new clothes for this holiday, and I wasn't quite sure that I would wear it apparently more than 30 times. That's the minimum amount of times you should be wearing a new piece of clothing. And that's when I started thinking more about this fashion rental idea I had and how to make it more like a sharing economy. So very much like what you see with Airbnb and Uber. And that's how the idea for ByRotation came about.
Fantastic. I think that's lovely. And I think you hit upon something that's very been amplified, I guess, by social media, that kind of rewear ick, where you just wear it once, maybe influenced by our connection to celebrities who just get stylist garments and you'll never see them in again. And it's sad that that's something that we've adopted, especially given the emotional significance of clothes. Like we've talked about how it's like the way we wear clothes has helped to form movements and, helps with political and social unrest. So given that, clothes do have this like really important, significant emotional meaning, how do you think that has impacted the retail process, like overall?
Do you mean the rental process? Yeah.
Oh yes, the rental process. Sorry.
Yeah. I think just being sort of very, very conscious of the fact that fashion is personal. As they say, like, how would you feel like walking a mile in my shoes? That saying.
Yeah.
Just kind of thinking about it, and that's how we decided to make the marketplace that you see ByRotation as today, as a social network. So very much based on connections and social kind of engagements with each other on the app. So what we have noticed is that women will repeat rent from the woman that they've rented the first time, because they'll kind of, they'll form like a bit of a camaraderie.
Bonds,
They'll be like, and a bond. They'll be like, oh, we were the same size. You have a similar style to me, or I really admire your style. I aspire to maybe, have your wardrobe one day, that sort of thing. So it's been really, really interesting kind of making ByRotation in terms of our product, which is the actual platform, the tech behind it, to make it much more of a social network. And that's why we have been dubbed as the Instagram of fashion rental as well.
I love that, like using clothes and fashion as a way to connect. I think that that's so important. We do naturally gravitate to people who share similar styles to us. We see that we can be reflected in their imagery and like what they're wearing. And I love that. I've definitely formed a bit of a bond with some people that I've rented from, because you have something that's shared. And I think that just speaks to the importance of fashion in general. And going back to you, Tamara, like, I think it's so annoying when you talk about fashion and people think that it's something that's frivolous or completely focused on aesthetics. How difficult for you was it to get people to really think about fashion in a new, more serious light?
She unmutes. I don't think that's a finished sentence. I think it's an ongoing issue. Um, I don't believe personally that either of the main parties in the UK have a grasp of the creative industries in the way that I would like them to, and in a way that I think they could. And I think it tracks back to who goes into leadership roles and the jobs and the people that they have around them. You just said that you have bonded with people whose dress sense perhaps aligns with your own. And I think it's the same with people. We go towards, people historically hire someone who reminds them of themselves or of someone that they are compelled to or respect. So it becomes these kind of small algorithms of community. And I think they call it the Westminster Village, and it's a village for a reason. So you will see a lot of high street navy blue single-breasted suits worn by young researchers who are running after a man in a possibly more expensive version of that suit. So it's still, I don't think it's ended. I don't think my work on this is finished. And if I wasn't doing it, I think there would be a massive gap, because I don't think that there's enough being done about it. I don't see enough thought leadership. We've had what's called a STEM education agenda in the UK for 12 years, which means that the creative industries have not been taught in the same way that they are in other countries, and that's had an impact on the talent supply chain. And not only that, it devalues the sector, and it means that the people that can do it are not in state education in the majority. So I call it the Downton Abbey effect, whereby you end up with a certain kind of person making TV dramas or theatre pieces or singing or having the wherewithal to become a designer. So it has a massive impact. And that's a piece of policy where the arts were taken out of education. So every single way you look, there's always a cause and effect. And I don't think it's over trying to communicate the value. I do feel there is a possible sexism around the reasons why the fashion industry is devalued. I think if it was another industry that's making the same amount of money for UK GDP, it wouldn't have that kind of lack of insight from politicians of all parties, actually.
Yeah.
And there are some who really get it, whether they get it from a craft side or a provenance issue or sustainability. There are, and they're the ones that obviously we gravitate, or social justice, like Baroness Lola Young of Hornsey. But they're not your everyday 650 MP. No.
No. And I think when you hit upon a point about education, I remember even going to school, like when I was in school, the textile kind of classes, they weren't seen as something that was like needed to be pushed at all. So I do agree that it needs to kind of start from young and into educational space as
So,
well.
for instance, at the moment, we're going to have an anomaly because of the Chancellor's mini budget. The incentive to inward invest into the UK, possibly from America or from other territories, is going to be bigger than ever. I think the UK film industry will see even more American investment. And so that could be an exciting opportunity because the pound's low against other global economies. But if we haven't trained the garment workers and we're refusing to add garment workers to the shortage occupation list, then there's a misfit between opportunity and reality. That's the kind of 1+1 that is very frustrating.
And given, I guess, with the mini budget, with the state of the pound right now, and with the lack of investment, do you think that we are at risk of losing a lot of like British fashion talent over here to other countries?
I mean, I think that the lack of buyers at Fashion Week, which has been going on for a while, is a worry. It shouldn't just be about a show, because it's a show that costs the designer a lot of money to create. And yes, you can have a beautiful moment on Instagram, but if you're having to go to Paris to sell, and you're not building the incentive to bring the buyers here, I think that's problematic. And I've thought that for many years. And actually, the industry that I joined, which was a long time ago, that wasn't the case. The buyers were here. Obviously, the market's different now, and but it changes, but there are always challenges. So Lynn Franks actually was this kind of, she's the person that they say AbFab was based on, and now she's running hippie retreats in Somerset, but actually she was a powerhouse as a PR. And she really rebooted London Fashion Week. And I remember going as an assistant, and it was packed. There were 2 shows running concurrently, and there was a massive buying space at Olympia, and it was absolutely rammed, and the buyers were there. And there are still buyers in the UK, but equally the incentive should be to get foreign buyers or get them online, not just push it all to Paris. I think that's a flaw, especially with the lower pound. We should be building opportunities for UK brands.
Yeah, I completely agree. And speaking about another major topic in fashion, sustainability. I mean, you can't say 2 sentences about fashion without talking about that. Eshita, can you tell us a bit more about your circular approach to fashion, and how does that help you necessarily engage a bit more in sustainability, and what angle are you trying to approach it with ByRotation?
For us, it's really all about putting the average consumer, the one who's walking on Oxford Street, or even your village high street, giving them the power, and not really waiting for the production side. So the fashion designers or these large conglomerates like LVMH or whatever, or obviously the fast fashion retailers to change, because I don't think it's in their interest really to change long term. They might still do a bit of resale and a bit of rental, but at the end they'll still be creating new product. So I think for us, I think it's, there's that saying, right? Like no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. So that's really what we're all about. We're getting you to think about the fact that instead of buying a new dress, be that from, a fast fashion retailer or, a place like Zara, instead of buying from there, why don't you borrow from someone else who might already have what you're looking for, or something similar? And by doing that, you can even, wear something that's more quality, or of like a designer that you actually aspire to own yourself one day. So for us, it's very much about circularity and sharing economy. And it's just by getting people to use what they already have. I think we all have a lot of clothes. On average, we have over 57 items in each person's wardrobe. I definitely have 3x of that. And from that, we're using about 30% of what we own. I probably use like 15% of it. So it's about unlocking the potential and getting, contemporary fashion to be an investment or an asset class. So not just your Birkin bags, not just your Chanel bags, but it could even be your 500-pound Temperley dress or your 300-pound Rixo dress that you could actually end up sharing with another woman and actually making your entire money back on it while still enjoying it. So what we have on the ByRotation app, or our community, or rotators as we call them, it's a group of women. It's predominantly women at the moment who are very, very conscious of their consumption habits when it comes to fashion. So that even when they do go and buy something new, they're much more strategic about it, because they're thinking about which brands actually work well for them, which ones will rent out well, which colors even are, super interesting to own, because you can actually make your money back on them. And that's something I think was probably like an unintended consequence. So it's not just about renting clothes and wearing something new every weekend just because you've rented it, but it's actually, creating this whole new approach to buying fashion, which is much more strategic.
Yeah, I love that. I feel every time I tell people when they're thinking of buying something new, you should consider the cost per wear. Because think about how often you're going to wear it, then you can figure out the true value of the clothes. But doing something like ByRotation and thinking about, okay, what you can actually get out of it, if it's is it something quality enough that you can actually think of an investment piece, I think that's going to even make people have a stronger attachment to their clothing because they're thinking of it as something that has not just emotional, but actually monetary value. But one issue I always think about with regards to clothes and fashion is the aspect of novelty. So, psychologically, we're hardwired to be attracted towards novel and new things, which I think has been a barrier for a lot of people getting into the kind of more sustainable things, getting some or renting something that is not new, that someone has previously owned. What is your take on this?
So for me, I think as humans, as animals, we'll always want something new. But new doesn't need to be like a completely, freshly created product just for you. I think it's more about the experience now. And it's almost more about access. Definitely for, I would say, my generation and increasingly the Gen Z from what I see and the people that I work with, it's really about, access over ownership. And we're seeing that more and more. It's about the experience of it. And people don't really mind anymore as much if something doesn't belong to you, as long as they got to enjoy it and then make a decision as to whether they do want to own it.
Yeah, fantastic. I do think right now we do think more about the experience of it, like how something served you for a particular amount of time doesn't necessarily mean you have to have it, because a lot of times, like you mentioned, we have it, we experience it, and then we leave it in our wardrobe for a long time. So why not give it a second life and give it a chance to someone else to carry on that story and that experience? And then again, I think sustainability is such an interesting topic, because the conversation right now has been who takes ownership of sustainability, right? So is it the consumers? Is it the way that we're shopping? And should we take the brunt of the burden with regards to how we're consuming, how much we're contributing to the issue? Should it be the brands themselves for getting taking more responsibility for creating all of this overconsumption, creating all of these lines, their marketing to have something newness all the time? Or is it a third thing, Tamara? It should be more on the politician side, the government side, to really start implementing legislation? Like what's the ratio of like who should really take ownership of the issue of sustainability?
Who's that to me or to
you, Tamara? Yeah.
I'm really not into blaming this mythical one person who's actually billions of people consumer. I'm not into it. I think that we've been on a runaway train. It's out of control. It's crashing. There's what I've seen has been a crash and burn mentality towards talent at one end of the spectrum. So I've seen many designers come and go who I think, had they been showing in other territories, would have established careers. That's tragic. Some of the collabs going on at the moment show a dearth of ideas from a design level, literally what is going on in people's brains. Some of the shows happening, the misogyny that is inbuilt into some of the silhouettes, what is going on. And at the other end, in terms of sustainability, you have a government who wants to get rid of the green levy on because they want to be seen to be saving money on the energy crisis. So sustainability always feels and smells like it costs more, it's worthy, and people kind of want to do it, but they don't really want to do it. I think of it now in a much different way from possibly even how I thought of it a few years ago. I think of it in terms of regenerative, planetary boundaries, looking at heritage and craft and how you can build those into opportunities and innovation. Everyone has kind of got very binary about science is good, tech is good, innovation is good, craft is a bit WI, and jam making and Jerusalem. And the reality is that I think that if we lose these skills, whether that's sewing or knitting or repairing or sharing and being part of a community, because that's essentially what ByRotation is, isn't it? It's a community. Then we lose touch with who we are. We lose touch with what is fashion. Fashion should be about a joy. Yeah. Big dress energy is about being in joy with who you are and what you're communicating. As a stylist, I knew that I was a storyteller, and I loved it. I loved creating visual magic with a team, coming together, boosting that team and that model to be their best that day and create something that people would love and want to turn the page or click on. Or I knew that if I worked for a magazine or a celebrity or a brand, they they were more successful, and that's a buzz. But that ultimately is what the fashion industry is about. It's a communicator. It understands deeper impacts far more quickly than other industries, but I think it's lost its way. I see it in what's coming on in the catwalk, and I see it in what brands are doing, and I think that confusion therefore makes it easier for us to point the finger at this consumer. Who is the consumer? We are the consumer. The brands are only going to do things if the governments are going to allow them to do it, and the governments are going to allow them to do it because they don't want to deal with the climate emergency. They want to put it on our children and our grandchildren, and we don't have time for that. We just don't. The floods in Pakistan, the heat wave here, they all hint to a climate emergency, and the industry is part of that, and it needs to own its complicity, and then it needs to fix up. But I don't believe brands will do it in isolation, so it has to come from legislation.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we all have a part to play. And I think when you talked about, Tamara, about the community aspect of it as well, getting people to really share in this belief and this understanding about, there needs to be something done. We need to all change the way that we're consuming, like, going forward. And Eshita, one thing I really love that community aspect on ByRotation is that you really see something for everybody. So you go on like the main page and you'll see people of different ethnic backgrounds, different ages, and different sizes as well. Was that something that was done very intentional, or did it just happen by happenstance that you just managed to just generate a lot of renters from this wide community?
It's definitely very intentional, and I think it comes from my own, the values that I have. I very much view myself as a global citizen. So I was born in India. I grew up in Singapore. I studied in the US and in the UK, and now I'm obviously based here. But I love the fact that I have a very diverse and varied background around me. And again, this isn't just about ethnicity or the size that you wear, but it could also be things like, your socioeconomic background, or your, what you learned in terms of your academics or your professional background. And I think it was really important for me to make sure that ByRotation ensured that sustainable fashion, this buzzword sustainable fashion, was at a price point that everyone could enjoy. Because I think a lot of times sustainable fashion or sustainable lines or whatever, this entire concept, it's very elusive, it's very exclusive. And, if a dress is sustainable, that often means it's produced in smaller quantities, which means it will therefore cost much more than a Zara dress anyway. So for me, it was very important to make sure that you could wear a quality dress for even cheaper than a fast fashion brand, than buying a completely new piece from a fast fashion brand. So yeah, and we're very proud of the community that we have today. It's over 300,000 women across the UK, hopefully global, not too far away from the future. And as you said, it's people of all ages, ethnic backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds. And I think that's what it needs to be about. It needs to be about people coming together and sharing their love for fashion, regardless of who they are in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a major thing to stop the barrier to entering sustainability. It can be seen that it's only for one particular type of person, but the fact that you show people from all walks of life, from all different styles, like you can get access no matter what type of fashion or what type of person you are, you can get into. ByRotation has something for everybody. And speaking of barriers, another barrier I think to the kind of rental online space is the fact that people are just cautious of whether something will work, because you do have to see the item, commit to renting it, and maybe people might not be so sure if it fits. I know a lot of the times people will buy a bunch of clothes at once and then end up returning like 95% of it. Like, how does ByRotation really help users to get it right the first time?
I think, again, this comes from, matching with someone on the app. So I think the first thing to say is, ideally, you would know which sort of brands that you like to wear anyway, or the ones that suit you or suit your body type, or, the ones that you feel most comfortable with. And typically, if you know which brands you like, then you may already know your size in them. And if you don't, then you can always chat with our community as well. So our lenders are very, very friendly, and of course they will be. They want you to rent from them, and they want to share their wardrobe with you. And once you've done your first rental, as I mentioned, a lot of women tend to repeat rent from the same woman over and over again, because again, they've built this friendship and they know they know that the size worked for them. It came on time. It was in the condition they expected. So yeah, I love the fact that it's become very much a self-policing kind of community. Everyone really trusts each other. They're very friendly. I've personally, as a lender, I have told women that this dress might be too short for you because, I've altered it a bit and I'm quite petite myself. So it's really nice because people also want to make sure that when they lend out their clothes, they will actually be worn and no one's time is being wasted.
Yeah, I love that you can actually get that real insight. I think a lot of people, when they're praising, I don't even like to mention, but Shein, when they're talking about their obsession with that site, it's always the review section at the bottom where people show pictures and say how it runs, if it's too small, if it's too big. But actually having someone like one-on-one that you can say, look, girl, I'm a bit curvy in the waist. Like, is it going to work here? Is it not going to work there? I think that creates that level of community. And then Tamara, I want to come back to you. I want to talk generally about, how Fashion Month is underway. Before, you've mentioned something about front row versus front bench and that analogy there. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I think they're really similar. I think that both industries work on a very similar premise, which is that getting to the front is getting to the top, and then it becomes about survival. I mean, today's news, so we're speaking on what is it, the 26th of September, and already I've heard that there have been letters of no confidence put in for Liz Truss, which is incredible. That's now showing that things are speeding up. She's the Prime Minister of the UK. She would have worked her whole career to get there. Every decision I would imagine that she's made has been premised on achieving her ambition. And I would say it's very similar for people who in long-standing jobs as fashion editors, or increasingly in other roles such as influencer or whatever name you want to give it now, who love the glory of sitting on the front row at a fashion show and feeling like they're fabulous and that they've made it, and that they're all powerful to all people. I think the premise of both is very alpha. And I, having worked in both, can see distinct similarities, even though, an MP once said to me, we're badly dressed celebrities, which I thought was rather true, because when you work in Parliament, particularly on a Monday evening to Wednesday, you'll see lots of events happening, and there'll be the handbag carrier who's walking a couple of steps behind an MP, or managing their diary as they go from event to event, having their photo up, whether it's holding a placard or saying, I don't know, I support the Farmers Alliance, or I support whatever it is, and or the people of Suffolk, or any number of issues that they will want to be seen to be part of, because it will win them constituency votes. So it's always seen through the lens of how can I stay popular, and I think fashion works on a very similar premise. Certainly the part I know, which is that side of it, coming from styling and fashion editorial.
Yeah, I think that popularity aspect of it can be very taxing. I know, especially I've spoken about a lot with women in politics there. They have an extra layer of focus on them and their looks and their visibility, and how that can translate into the amount of support that they're getting. And I know at Fashion Roundtable, you've talked a lot about the role of like mental health within the fashion industry. Can you tell us a bit more about all of the initiatives that you've been working on to?
I mean, I think that being freelance is very, very challenging, and being economically fragile, which the last few years have shown. And now I would say for any small business owner, with the energy crisis having its impact on the escalating bills, even though there's been a cap, it's still going to be double what it was last year. Import-export costs, lots of confusion. It's not a very stable period. So I think it's one thing to go through a kind of digital awakening and the move to online platforms and the sharing economy and other opportunities which are exciting, but I do not underestimate, and I come from parents who had their own business, how challenging it is for people. And I think it's those lived experiences that I really realize have ultimately always informed my decision making about things, because I've seen how I think anyone that has a business is brave. And anyone that wants to be creative is also brave. So put those two things together and you have an awful amount of bravery, but it doesn't always get the support. Retail is a fantastic opportunity to share your vision of a world as you'd like it to be, and yet it's not getting the kind of support that I think it deserves. And yet we are a country of small businesses and shopkeepers and creative innovators, and I think the lack of support is criminal, really, because if you don't see the best ideas here, you're not going to see them anywhere.
Yeah. And I think that leads us nicely to you, Eshita. How difficult or challenging has it been to set up ByRotation? And in talking about your challenges, maybe you can give some advice for people that are small business owners, especially within the fashion space, from what you've gone through and what you've learned. What advice can you give?
Yeah, I think, COVID was especially difficult, but that's not just limited to the UK. Obviously, that was a global pandemic. But I think it's been sort of, I would say probably from the other side again, we're very much a fashion tech player. And if you think about it historically, there's not been a lot of British or UK fashion tech companies that have actually scaled up and, been successfully now exited or listed. There's maybe a few like Depop and Farfetch you can think of. I think there's not enough support from the government, from the investment space to actually support, innovative players like ourselves. And look, I love the fact that the UK is really well known for amazing fashion houses and fashion designers, but I think that there needs to be some sort of programs and some inclusion as well of, fashion tech players such as ourselves, because we can really help solve. Sorry about that. Sorry. Because we can really help solve, these issues around circularity and the sharing economy. It's just a shame that none of these large companies that you now hear of in the tech space and the sharing economy have come from the UK. I think the only one that I can think of is Olio, which is in the food waste sector. So there definitely needs to be more support, I think, and fashion shouldn't just be limited to fashion designers and production of fashion. That's been my experience, but obviously love the heritage British brands, and I love that London is so, it's viewed so much as the fashion capital of the world. And as for advice for anyone who's sort of in this space, I think one of the things that I feel we have done well and we continue to do well is to be very mindful of the resources that we have, which again is, it comes down to our values, which is to share and to use what you already have. I think that the fashion industry and a lot of businesses in this space kind of view it as, oh, first impressions really count, so it needs to be perfect when we launch, and therefore I'm going to spend a lot of money because it's all about how things look on, externally and superficially. But I found it to be a very different experience for myself, which is you improve gradually and you're not perfect on day one. You actually, and you listen to the customer to understand what they actually want rather than you dictate what is perfect and beautiful and what's your vision. And I think that happens a lot in sort of like creative industries such as fashion, from what I've noticed.
Brilliant. And then moving from the big issues from Parliament to brands and thinking more about the everyday person who might be listening to this podcast and just wants to know maybe how they can really make a difference in how they consume and the way they think about fashion. I guess, Eshita, what great one piece of advice would you give to someone who is maybe like a fast fashion addict and just wants to make that change?
Yeah, I think start thinking of fashion more as, as assets, really, as pieces to value and cherish and maybe hold on to for many, many years. And also, I guess the thing that I love to say is, you should always look at buying less, sharing more, and obviously rotating. So using the ByRotation app with each other.
Fantastic. And Tamara, kind of similar question to you. How can we get people to think about fashion a bit differently and approach their relationship to fashion differently?
I think the words don't help us, right? The word fashion sounds frivolous. The word sustainability sounds like a bit yawny to people and they switch off. And so I think I've realized this more and more. It's like when I'm speaking about the fashion industry, I'm speaking about the largest of the creative industries. I'm talking about the wool industry, which has been part of the UK economy since medieval times, as much as I'm talking about online platforms such as Eshita's. You know, there are many, many aspects to this. This is industry. It's a massive sector. It's a massive employer, and it's a massive part of the economy. And until it's perceived in a different way, I think we've got an image problem, which is ironic, isn't it, for an industry that's based around visuals. In terms of the question that you posed to Eshita about fast fashion, I have to say I've never really been a fast fashion consumer because I fell in love with vintage. So I would trawl charity shops to buy old grannies 1960s cocktail dresses or go to Camden Market as a teenager coming up from the suburbs. So I haven't really ever had that, but I do understand the dopamine hit that is at the heart of why we're consuming like that. And I think that it goes back to what are we lacking in our lives that we're trying to fill the void, and how can we navigate filling that void with more thought and heart back into it? Because if I see someone with several bags from one shop, then clearly they could be supported to consume in a different way. And it's how do we challenge that sense of, well, I haven't got much money, so this is all I can afford, and the volume versus other options, because that dopamine hit is there because people want to get the high from the consumer cult, from the sense of feeling engaged or uplifted by something. So how can we support them to transition into a new way? Because I think that era we have to die. That's come out of post World War II Western politics. So how can we shift it to something else? And I think that's what we're here for. We're here for the well-being economy. We're here for regeneration and more thought-led community action.
Yeah. And I thank you both so much, because I think conversations like this is really what is going to get the dial moving and get people to take a step back and start rethinking their approach to fashion in the big sense, and in this fashion with a small f as well, and their personal relationship with clothing. So I want to thank you both for joining us. And before we go, I want each of you to say how people can reach you, find out more about what you're doing. So Tamara, can you give us maybe an insight into your socials, or where people can find out more about your work and with Fashion Roundtable?
Sure. So we have a newsletter that goes out every Tuesday. You can opt into it via the link on our Instagram, which is the very complicated Fashion Roundtable. And I think it's the same on all the other platforms. We're on LinkedIn, and we're also on Twitter, and we're on Facebook. We're not on TikTok. But the newsletter is a really good way to get some original content and also learn about our events and our reports. So for instance, we had a report that went into DEFRA, which is the environment part of government, last week, which you can pick up in tomorrow's.
Fantastic. And Eshita, where can people find out about you and ByRotation?
Yeah, you can find me on the ByRotation app. So that's BY space rotation, not BY, do not buy. My username is Eshita on there. And yeah, I'd love to rotate with you on there. And otherwise, you can also find us at byrotation.com. The app is free to download. And on Instagram and TikTok, we are ByRotation.
Yeah,
thank you.
Check out Eshita's collection. I wish I was the same size as you, because you have some really cool things, but I have to appreciate.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you everybody for listening to today's podcast. I'm Shakaila Forbes-Bell. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Shakaila Elise. And Buy Big Just Energy. It is out now and it's available at all the bookstores. So thank you for listening, and we'll catch you. Bye.